now my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Zelman Kastel, AM, to address the meeting. When you're ready, my friend.
Good afternoon. Good to be back here again. Alex asked me to talk about the spirit of Anzac and the aspiration of Together for Humanity, and how these two ideas, these two sets of sacred concepts kind of fit together. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. Thank you, Uncle Harry, for your welcome. So acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. Now, this gesture of respect for the Aboriginal people, for the custodianship, for all of that history and perspective is part of a spirit of Together for Humanity, of people from different backgrounds acknowledging different ways of thinking and different experiences, what's important to others. On a superficial level, that's got nothing to do with Anzac Day. If you think about Anzac Day in a very narrow sense, you might say that Together for Humanity and Anzac Day are almost contradictory, in conflict with each other. I don't agree with that false dichotomy. So let me define these two ideas. Together for Humanity as an idea is about people coming together, people from different backgrounds, different identities, different cultural ties, different stories, and recognizing that with all of our differences, there is that common humanity, and that we acknowledge the dignity for every single person, that all human beings need to be seen as humans. Anzac Day is a more specific tradition, a more specific experience to us as Australians. But here, living in Australia, I would argue that in order for us to be able to live in the spirit of Together for Humanity, it's only possible because of the spirit of Anzac. Now, Anzac is not just a historical event, although Uncle Harry and Alex, you've told us about your experiences of what this is about, but it's also living within us. It's a spirit, it's a way of life, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of being. It's already been spoken about earlier, what is the spirit of Anzac? And if I can just add some of my little thoughts to that, my little list would be loyalty, friendship, duty, sacrifice, selflessness, service, endurance, and larrikinism. According to official war historian C.E.W. Bean, the spirit of Anzac stood and still stands for reckless valor and a good cause, for enterprise, resourcefulness, fidelity, comradeship, and endurance that will never own defeat. I want to talk about that word fidelity for a moment. Fidelity is defined as faithfulness and loyalty to a person, a cause, or belief. Loyalty is both an underrated and overrated virtue. On the one hand, there, of course, need to be ethical limits to loyalty. Sometimes justice demands that we don't defend the undefensible, even if it's from people on our own side. Samuel Johnson stated that about the wrong kind of patriotism. Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. We've seen people wrap themselves in Australian flags. Those of us remember the Cronulla riots, but it continues using the Australian flag to make all kinds of ridiculous statements, whether it's anti-vax or it's saying that I'm more Australian than somebody else. But on the other hand, I think in our time, there is a failure to appreciate the virtue of loyalty. I think the call of Anzac Day is to stand in solidarity with our people, with those who defended us as Australians, as specific people in a specific place, and that being here as Australian citizens, as residents of this great country, we've got a connection with certain people who have died for us. And a healthy, appropriate patriotism to the land in which we live. There are people who don't, well-intentioned people, who mock this idea of belonging, of connecting, of having some kind of loyalty, particularly to a faith or a flag. Surely we're all universal people. We're all part of mankind. Although to me, it sounds a bit like the child who says that everybody's my best friend and has no real connection with anybody. I think that it is important to have those different circles of care. Of course, we should care about all mankind, and any human being suffering should concern us. But that doesn't contradict having a loyalty to a club, a loyalty to a faith, a loyalty to a neighborhood, a loyalty to a city or a nation. Those who have no loyalty, of course, don't come here to Rotary. They're not joiners, they're customers. They're just drifters. They come, show up at something, they might show up to a protest, like something on Facebook or express some outrage on TikTok or wherever it is that people express outrage these days, but really feel connected to no one. As a Jewish man celebrating Passover, I just want to share with you a puzzling conversation I had. Passover is celebrated with a ceremonial meal, and part of it is a reading about 4 sons. One is a wise son who is curious and wants to learn. One is a wicked son. Now you wonder, what would lead a tradition to label someone as wicked? And it's quite stark. The wicked son simply does not want to identify with his community. The wicked son says, what is all of this for you? It's got nothing to do with me. And at a superficial level, that's okay. You know, we're Australians, we believe in freedom of thought. And surely, why can't someone, they don't want to participate, so let them be, live and let live. But there is a social cost to people not joining anything, for people being absolutely radically individualistic and not participating in the collective need. There's a cost for the individual and there's a cost for society. If people can't be part of something, then things don't grow, then things don't become. The organizations, the civil society, the Rotary clubs, these are part of what makes us a society, makes us a community, enables us to work collectively for the greater good of all. One of the villains of the Bible is a fellow named Balaam. Balaam is a sorcerer, he's a gun for hire, he curses nations, but etymologically, Balaam actually is a combination of 2 Hebrew words. Am is nation, Baal is not. Balaam is not nation. Balaam has no loyalty. Balaam has no connection. He is not part of anyone, and therefore he owes nothing to anyone. And I think Anzac Day is very much the opposite of that. It's this idea of mateship. It's this idea of a collective responsibility towards others. Colonel Arthur Burke wrote that Anzac consists of comradeship, courage, sacrifice, others before self. It also encompasses the laughter, the pride, and love of life. Burke writes that Australia, being a very big country, particularly in our early history, you often had a farmer who would hear about someone else, you know, hundreds of kilometers away having trouble, and they jump on their horse to go and help, because that was what it looked like practically to be community oriented, was that when you lived in this vast land, you had to help each other out because you just simply couldn't survive otherwise. And that spirit, the way he puts it, you know, the mother country is in a spot of bother again, was a typical observation when the Great War began in 1914. Might as well help her out, get this sorted, was the response of people at the time. And that's the spirit that led volunteers to dash off to the First World War and to form what became Anzac. Poet laureate John Mansfield wrote, "These bold, laughing soldiers were a new unknown factor. They seemed to be of one race, for all of them had something the same bearing and something the same look of humorous, swift decision." So today, here we are, safe, free, clothed with all the privileges and rights of citizenship that these great countries, Australia and New Zealand, provide to us. All of these things, liberty, security, opportunity, the privilege of citizenship, we owe to those who fought, endured, and suffered, and died for us and for their country. Their deeds and their sacrifices gave us the spirit of Anzac. The spirit of Anzac is a solid foundation on which to build an inclusive, accepting, and at times tolerant society. By cultivating loyalty to one's nation, community, and neighbors, or Rotary Club, that develops a character that's oriented to friendship, goodwill. And once you develop those characteristics, you can extend them to the other, to the stranger, to someone that you don't know. Whereas those who have no loyalty don't develop those characteristics in the first place often. By living one's life in accordance with one's duty, one develops the capacity for sacrifice, selflessness, and service and endurance to stick it out when it gets ridiculously hard. Rotary, of course, is dedicated to peace, and peace is not always peaceful. Peace work is often frustrating, disappointing. There's a lot of fighting that goes on in the pursuit of peace, as those who are engaged with peace work are well aware. And it's that endurance to stick with it, to recognize that if something is worthwhile, it's worth fighting for. And so it's that and those Anzac virtues that enable us to persevere when differences make us uncomfortable and frustrated. Good people do together for humanity, not because it is always delightful, but because it is our duty and it is right. So I conclude with that Australian characteristics of larrikinism. The capacity to laugh at ourselves, to laugh at pompous, self-important people and their ways of doing things is also really important for embracing the other. We need to be able to laugh, to be humble, down to earth, not see ourselves in our cultural ways as superior or sacred. Let us always remember, let us never forget the Anzacs, and let us live together for the humanity of all people by drawing on the spirit of Anzac. Lest we forget.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your presentation. I am going to call on our President-elect, David Hirsch, if you might join us for a vote of thanks for Rabbi Zelman. Thanks, David.
Thanks, President Mark, and it's nice to be back in Australia and to see you all. It's been a while in Zoom land as well. One of the things about offering a vote of thanks here in Rotary is that there's so many people to thank. I know I'm supposed to acknowledge Zelman, which I will in a moment, but you've been treated to some remarkable insights from a lot of people. I think everybody deserves some recognition. Harry, thank you again for coming back again and for reminding us that we're here to consider and remember and acknowledge the servicemen and women of Australia and all they have done and continue to do for us. And that Anzac is a tradition. It is something that means so much to the identity of Australians. And you've mentioned, of course, those 4 critical traits of courage, endurance, mateship, and sacrifice. Major McGuigan, thank you for reminding us, among other things, that it is through the sacrifice of others that we have been able to, that we are able to enjoy the freedoms that we have now. And as I heard what you said about the importance of sacrifice, I thought to myself, well, regardless of what religious tradition you may care to follow, Rotary is full of people of better angels. The better angels tend to show up at Rotary. So thank you for reminding us of the importance of that. We are not here to glorify war, as you correctly said, but we have to acknowledge the sacrifice of the Anzacs in forming the identity of this great country. So thank you for that. Alex, thank you for relating those important stories of sacrifice and reminding us that sacrifice is an important part of being a Rotarian, putting the interests of others ahead of yourselves. That's what service is about. And Zelman, as usual, a talk of Talmudic depth, acknowledging that there is a relationship between the narrow Anzac tradition and the wider Together for Humanity. We do share a common humanity, and that great strength of Australia is made possible by the actions of that smaller group that we acknowledge at Anzac Day. You provided us with a list of this catalog of things that make you an Australian. But you hovered over fidelity, which I think is really critical. Fidelity, loyalty, being prepared to acknowledge, identify, stand up for a group. And you made the point, which I think is very important, that loyalty can be overdone. You can wrap yourself in the flag and do the most hideous things in the name of loyalty. But loyalty is also underdone. I think you're right to remind us that we should acknowledge and respect those who feel strongly about any tradition. And there's often a lack of appreciation that is a shame. And I think the point that you made, that there is a cost to excessive individualism, is an important one for us to remember. We have this idea that being an individual, doing what you want when you want, is so important, but that's really not what holds a society together. And thank you for reminding us that that can go too far. And what really holds a society together is collective responsibility for others, I think is the phrase that you use. And lastly, the observation that peace is something that has to be fought for at times. And that means that you have to stand up and be counted and make sacrifices for what you believe in. And you said that it's important to stick to your guns, as it were, to maintain a certain virtue, which the Anzac tradition gives us. And when we talk about virtue, and we talk about the Anzac virtue, and we talk about that importance of service to others, I'm reminded that really this is where it all knits up so nicely with Rotary, because this is an organization that acknowledges that loyalty, that is held together by that sense of service and sacrifice. So thank you, Anzac. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Zelman. Thank you to all others, and of course to those who've organized this. Putting on these hybrid functions is not easy. Adri, thank you for making this happen. President Mark, Alex, and those who are out there who I haven't mentioned, that without whom this couldn't have happened at all. So a long way of saying thank you to all of you for making this such a memorable Anzac tradition.